Legislative History on Westlaw for the Advanced Legal Research course at Boston College Law School. One way to find federal legislative history information on Westlaw is through the History tab of an individual U.S. Code section. A useful place to start, if you're dealing with a code section that has been revised a lot, is the Editor's and Reviser's Notes, which begins with historical notes. I find it especially helpful to scroll down to the amendments where we can see which changes were made in which years. For example, here we see that the definition of motion picture exhibition facility was in the 2005 amendments, section 102 subsection C of Public Law 109-9. Linking to another page on this tab, Legislative History Materials, we can see that the documents are sorted by date with a reference to the public law that document is associated with, and can be filtered by content types. An especially useful thing to look for is a compiled legislative history. I've reversed the sort order to be oldest first so we could see the one prepared by the law firm of Arnold & Porter on the 1976 Copyright Revision Act. The other 5 are for GAO compiled legislative histories that we'll look at in a moment. Linking to the Arnold & Porter legislative history, the document it takes us to in the legislative history is a copy of the public law itself. But the really useful thing on this page, and every document in this database, is the link to the table of contents for this legislative history. This table of contents lists and links to the various documents in the legislative history arranged by Congress. You can also open this legislative history as a searchable database. A second way to look for legislative history materials on Westlaw is through the legislative history link in the Content Types tab on the main page. The link is towards the bottom under the heading Specialty Areas, so a global Westlaw search does not search through these documents. You need to select legislative histories to run a legislative history search. On the right side of the page, under the heading Tools and Resources, you can see a link to the legislative histories compiled by the law firm of Arnold & Porter. This is where you can find a link to the Arnold & Porter legislative history of the Copyright Revision Act of 1976 we were just looking at. To the left of that is a link to the GAO legislative histories. If you remember, there were links to 5 GAO legislative histories in the linked legislative history materials for 17 USC 101. This database is a collection of legislative histories that were compiled by the Government Accountability Office from 1921 to 1995. There was no link to a GAO legislative history for Public Law 94-553, the 1976 Copyright Revision Act, on the tab. But given that this is a major piece of legislation, and this law is within the date range of this database, I think it's worth running a search here. It is very important to read and follow the instructions on Boolean searching in this database. To search for a legislative history in the public law number field, follow the instructions on the screen and type PL +2, followed by the public law number. Our search gets 4 results, which are really 4 parts of this compiled legislative history. Let's look at the first part. Here we see a list of links to PDF documents that are the content of this legislative history. When Westlaw searches this database, it searches the content of these underlying PDFs and marks in yellow those documents that contain our search terms. If I had included additional search terms, there would be more highlighted PDFs. The remaining legislative history database on Westlaw is in the West Publication United States Code and Administrative News, known as USCAN. You may remember from our discussion of statutes that USCAN preprints statutes at large and highlights of legislative history, among other things. Before 1970, it was very difficult for anyone outside of Washington, D.C. to get their hands on any legislative history materials beyond what was in USCAN. You can search USCAN by document types, but remember this is a selective legislative history and does not necessarily contain a particular document type for any legislative history. Use the advanced search to get best results. Use caption field to find all the documents relating to a particular public law number. On this search results screen, we notice there are 2 reports, although only one of them appears on this overview screen. There is also a link to the public law itself. By searching the caption field, we get all of the documents in UScan related to this public law. Contrast that with a search of the citation field. A search for 11229, the public law number of the America Invents Act, in the citation field gets us documents that have the number 11229 in their citations. This search also retrieves the America's Invents Act, which is Public Law 11229, but no other documents from its legislative history. Instead, it retrieves the 29th House and Senate reports from the 112th Congress, none of which are about the America Invents Act. So remember to search by caption to get all the documents related to your public law in a search by public law number.